Picture this, it's 1977. The dance floor is packed. The lights are spinning. The bass is so loud you feel it in your chest. Everyone is moving. Everyone is free. No one is thinking about geopolitics. No one is thinking about the Cold War. That was part of what made it powerful, because far from that dance floor, in government offices, not nightclubs, officials had already spent decades studying something very specific, how culture shapes perception, and by the time disco went global, that lesson was no longer theoretical. Disco emerged in the early 1970s in underground clubs in New York City. It was built by Black, Latino, and queer communities, groups largely excluded from mainstream cultural spaces. These clubs weren't designed as political tools. They were spaces of expression, identity, and release. Then disco scaled. By the mid-1970s, it had moved from subculture to mass culture. Through radio, film, and global distribution, Saturday Night Fever helped accelerate that shift. So did artists like Donna Summer and Bee Gees. A localized cultural movement had become global, and once culture reaches that scale, it doesn't exist in isolation anymore. During the Cold War, the United States did not treat culture as neutral. In 1950, an organization called the Congress for Cultural Freedom was established. It publicly funded magazines, exhibitions, and cultural programs across Europe. In 1967, investigative reporting revealed that it had been covertly funded and directed by the CIA. This is not disputed history. The goal was explicit: to promote the image of the West as culturally open, creative, and free. In contrast to the Soviet Union, one of the clearest examples was jazz diplomacy. Artists like Louis Armstrong and Dizzy Gillespie were sent on State Department-sponsored international tours. Jazz was not chosen randomly. It was improvisational, expressive, and distinctly American. It communicated freedom without needing translation. By the 1970s, this idea was already established. Culture could function as soft power. Throughout the Cold War, the U.S. funded international broadcasters, including Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Their role was to transmit news, information, and Western cultural content into Eastern Bloc countries. This included music. Archival records confirm that contemporary Western music, including disco in the 1970s, was part of that programming. There is no declassified evidence of a formal disco strategy, equivalent to earlier jazz diplomacy programs. What the evidence does show is this: disco became part of a broader cultural signal, a way of broadcasting everyday life in the West. And that signal carried more than sound. It carried lifestyle, aesthetics, and atmosphere. At the same time, U.S. foreign policy in Latin America was operating on a very different level. In the mid-1970s, intelligence agencies in several countries coordinated a campaign to track and eliminate political dissidents. This network is now known as Operation Condor. Declassified documents confirm that U.S. intelligence agencies were aware of these operations. Separately, the United States maintained cultural and information programs through the United States Information Agency. Across the same region, these included libraries, broadcasts, and cultural outreach. There is no direct evidence that entertainment media, including disco, was deployed as part of repression strategies, but both realities coexisted: hard power through military and intelligence support, and soft power through cultural presence. They were not the same mechanism, but they operated in the same environment. On July 12, 1979, Disco Demolition Night took place at Comiskey Park in Chicago. Thousands of disco records were collected and destroyed on the field. The event escalated into a riot. It is often described as a publicity stunt. It was also something more complex. Disco had become highly commercialized. There was growing backlash from rock audiences, and many historians point to racial and homophobic undertones in the rejection of a genre rooted in Black and queer communities. What followed is well documented: a rapid decline in disco's presence in mainstream American radio and industry support. This shift does not require a coordinated explanation. Market saturation, cultural backlash, and industry realignment are sufficient to explain it. Here is what the historical record supports. The U.S. government used culture as a strategic tool during the Cold War. That is documented. State-funded media distributed Western music globally, including disco. That is documented. The U.S. was aware of and involved in Cold War operations. That included severe political repression in Latin America. That is documented. What isn't documented is a single coordinated plan. Tying all of this together, but the pattern is clear. When culture goes global, it doesn't stay just culture. It becomes part of something bigger. The music was real, the joy was real, but culture doesn't move on its own. It's produced, distributed, amplified, and those systems shape what reaches us. The feeling is yours, but how it got to you, that's worth understanding.